Hello world and welcome to Learning Java, one byte at a time. This is the 5th video in a tutorial series geared at bringing the wonderful wide world of Java to those with little or no programming experience. In the last video, we toyed around a bit with our Hello World program to get a better understanding of the code by extracting the literal string that we were passing through as a parameter to the println function and sourcing that out as 3 independent variables known as greeting English, greeting Spanish, and greeting French. So we were able to get a better understanding of exactly what was going on there as sort of 2 degrees of reference, and now we're going to expand even further by writing our own function. We're going to define those variables in a slightly different way, and then we're going to pass those through to our own proprietary function as a way of getting even better understanding of what's going on when that happens. So we'll start by opening up our Notepad++ application. I'd like to make a new Java file. We're going to start from scratch, and let's call this one greeting.java with a capital G. So, as we know in Java, everything is a class, so let's start with our class by the same name. Make sure to put our curly braces, and inside the body of our class, we'll put our mandatory main function, just as it always appears. Now, as mentioned before, the main method, it's looking for a parameter, and that parameter in this case happens to be an array of string variables that we're going to be calling args. And even though as developers, we're rarely going to use this, especially in the beginning. It's important that it's always there because the main method will be looking for it, and if it's not there, it's going to be confused. Now, if we were to write our own method, we could do a similar thing. We could say this method should be accepting some parameters, and we could give those parameters a name to which we'll be referencing them throughout the body of that function. And we're going to do just that. And so outside of the body of the main method, we're going to write a new method. And just like the main method, we're going to make it public. We're also going to make it static. This method also is not going to be in and of itself containing a value. That's to say, if we call this method, it's not going to return a number or a word or anything like that. It's just going to perform a function. It's just going to perform a task. So that'll be void because it's not going to return anything. And we're going to name this one greet. We'll put our curly braces so that greet has its own body. And now our greet function is going to do something. It's going to greet. And it's going to do that with a string variable that we're going to call greeting. Now, since we are not sure exactly which string variable we're going to be passing through at any given time, we're going to keep it generic. And so just like the main method, we're going to say, okay, expect a string variable of some type. And throughout the body of this method, let's refer to that string variable as a greeting. And just as I mentioned in previous videos, we're saying I declare a method. I declare a function. I declare that this thing is going to do something. This thing is going to be public, which means that any other class can call this function. Any other class can make it do it. It's going to be static, which means it's pretty much going to be stuck to the greeting class. And now, to explain a little bit better, if the greeting class were something that were going to be duplicated or replicated or copied and pasted, this particular function is going to be stuck to the original. It's not going to be copied and pasted on any of the replicas. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now, I'm sure, but that's going to get clearer as we get through these videos. If I try to evaluate this function, that's to say, if I try to say, what does this function equal after all said and done, it's not going to equal anything because it's not going to be doing any arithmetic or computation or anything like that. It's just going to perform a task. And so as a value, this function is void, so it's not going to return anything. And the name of this function, what I'm going to refer to this function as is greet. And as I mentioned before, a function is something that does something, and the parameters are it's doing something as if. And so I'm going to say this function is going to greet as if it had a string variable that we're going to henceforth refer to as greeting. So now inside the body of this method, let's define exactly what that functionality is. It's going to be very similar to the last hello world. We're going to print a line out to the system. And as we know, that println function is going to be looking for its own parameter, which could be the greeting English, greeting Spanish, or greeting French string variables we defined in the last one. But to keep it even more flexible, we're going to add another degree of reference, and we're going to take what we've henceforth declared as being a string variable known as greeting, and we're going to pass that through, just as is. No quotation marks, because we don't want it to literally print the word greeting. We want it to encounter this and say, okay, this is something that it's referring to, and up here I've been told that greeting is going to refer to a string variable, and the string variable is something that should be getting passed through whenever this function gets called, whenever I'm told to greet. And just as if the main method without passing through any of these parameters would be confused, if we try to call the greet function and we don't pass through a string, it's not going to know what the greeting string is, and then it's going to be itself confused. This might be a little bit clearer in just a minute. And so in the body of not the main function or the main method as we did before, but in the body of the greeting class, I'm going to once again declare a variable known as a string. Except because it's in the body of the class, I'm going to be careful and make sure that it's known as a static string. And static, as I mentioned before, means that these variables, if this greeting class were to be copied and duplicated or replicated, that these variables are not going to be in and of themselves copied to any of those replicas. They're going to be pretty much stuck to this original greeting class. And that's going to get clearer as we go through these videos. So I'm going to declare a static string variable, and it's going to be, as before, greeting English, greeting Spanish, and greeting French, and not forgetting my semicolon. So you've noticed something a little different here. I've declared all three of these in line. I haven't made a separate line for each declaration. So what I'm essentially doing is letting Java know, hey, there's going to be more than one variable, separating them with a comma so that Java knows that they're separate. But Java's also going to know that because they're all being declared in line, each one of these is going to be a string variable. It's just a way of taking a shortcut and keeping it a little bit more organized. But I'm not going to actually assign anything to them, not at least in the class, because that's not actually permissible. And so after declaring those three string variables in line under one string declaration, and letting the class greeting know that it was going to be stuck to that class, it's not going to be duplicated, inside the main method, I'm going to go ahead and assign them. And so if you're hip to the curve, you can kind of see what's going on here. Because the main method is the entry point of the class greeting, as soon as the Java begins to execute this code, it's going to immediately have these string variables declared. It's going to enter here in the main method, and it's going to go ahead and assign values to those string variables. So hello world for English, hola mundo for Spanish, and bonjour le monde for French. And then we need to tell it to call the greeting or the greet function. And the way that we do that is simply greet, like this. However, I haven't passed through my parameters. And so if I do call this greet function, it's going to jump over here to the greet function. It's going to be looking for the parameter string and then be confused that it's not there, because if I don't have a string variable that I'm going to henceforth call greeting, when I get to this command to print something to the screen, I'm not going to know what to print. And so not only am I going to call the function, am I going to actually tell it do this thing, but I'm going to tell it as if, and I'm going to reference one of my previous string variables. So we're going to greet a greeting English. And let's break this down very quickly before we compile it and execute it. So the function known as greet is looking for a parameter in the form of a string variable. As I call the greet function in the main method, the entry point to the program, I'm going to pass through one of these string variables, which is greeting English, which I've declared up here in the class body. And that, as we know, has a literal representation, a literal string of text called hello world. And so I've declared a string variable named string English. In the main method, I've assigned it a literal string of text. I'm passing through that string as a parameter to the greet function. Once it comes down here to execute the greet function, it receives what it expects, which is a string. During this function, inside the body of this function, that string will henceforth be known as greeting. And then when I make a call to the system to print out a line, I'm going to pass through that which we know as being greeting. And so you see here 3 degrees of separation, 3 degrees of reference. And so I'm pretty sure that if you're following along, you'll already know what this is going to look like upon compiling, but let's just go ahead and compile it to make sure that we've got everything right. We're going to use the javac command on greeting.java, and there were no compilation errors, so that much at least is right. A directory search shows that we do in fact have that now compiled greeting class. So let's clear the screen and use the Java command to execute that greeting. And there we are, hello world. So, real quickly, we'll jump back here to the code, and instead of passing through the greeting English to the function, just to prove that the functionality is true, we're going to change it very, very simply to greeting Spanish. Save that file. Let's delete that greeting class so we can recompile it. Still compiles correctly. It's still present. And execute. Now that we've made that minor change, that one word change, passing through the reference to the greeting Spanish instead of the greeting English, when we execute this, we get Hola Mundo. And just for kicks, we'll change it to French. We'll delete the class so that we can compile it one more time. And we will run it now. Bonjour le monde. Alright, so as you can see, now we have 3 degrees of representation. We have written our own function. We've declared it to be public, meaning it can be called by any other class. It's static, so it's stuck to this class greeting. It's not going to return anything per se, because it's not going to evaluate anything. It's only going to perform a function. And we're calling it greet. This is a name of our choosing. We've given it a parameter to expect, again of our choosing, but it's got to be a standard parameter that Java recognizes, which is the string parameter, the string variable. We're naming what it's going to be passed through so that we have a way of referencing that string throughout the body of this function, and then we simply printed a line out to the system of that reference. So hopefully again this was clear. Questions, comments, any problems, the comment section is perfect for that. We'll figure it out together. Can't wait to see you all in the next video as we explore a little bit finer functionality of methods and functions. We explore a little bit better into variables, and then probably get into some if-then-else statements and program flow. So anyway, I look forward to seeing you all back soon, and thank you very much. Have a beautiful night.